Hi everybody and welcome to my new video. In this video I want to talk to you about why I study philosophy and why I think philosophy is one of the most misunderstood and therefore underrated disciplines possible in academia. Now, I came to philosophy kind of by accident. When I was on the IB, the International Baccalaureate, we had to study compulsory theory of knowledge, which was a fairly green version of what later turned out to be epistemology. So I was introduced to philosophy through theory of knowledge, but not only that. When I was studying higher English and world literature on the International Baccalaureate, we touched upon some French existentialism through Camus and Sartre. So I would say that my kind of philosophical cogs started whirring and were born, in fact, when I read The Outsider by Albert Camus. I'm certainly not the only person who came to philosophy through French existentialism. In fact, I think it's true to say that many people, students in particular, come to philosophy having read some Camus. In fact, many of my course mates actually share this phenomenon with me. We all found philosophy through French existentialism. And that's kind of strange and in some ways misleading, because philosophy as we study it in the UK is not particularly sympathetic, or it doesn't tend to champion existentialist schools particularly. I mean, before studying Camus on the International Baccalaureate, I was completely clueless really about what philosophy was, and I think it's not unfair to say that philosophy itself is a deeply misunderstood term, and there's very little consensus, even among philosophers, about what philosophy actually is and what its goal is as well. But I'm grateful for having studied Camus, even though where I study now at King's College, we don't study much continental philosophy at all, and in fact in the whole degree there is no French existentialism, and in some ways that's a pity, but it's also a good thing, I think. So the reason I love philosophy is because I feel that it champions a much unsung aspect of scholarship in general, which is the priority of rational argument. In philosophy, every student has a grounding in logic. That is absolutely imperative. There's no way around it. That is one of our toolkits, logic. And I feel that as philosophers, we're actually quite privileged in receiving such a fantastic education in logic. My cat's distracting me. So philosophy gives you tremendous tools in critical thinking, which obviously have great transferable value into different lines of work, depending on what you actually want to do with your philosophy degree. I'm not saying that you obviously have to do a philosophy degree. It's perfectly sufficient, if you wish, to simply read philosophy, ingest philosophical ideas, and employ the methods of philosophy in your daily life. So the adherence to, rationality, rigor, and, debunking dogma, basically. Some people would argue with this, but I think it's actually a great privilege to study the thoughts of those who went before us. Even though they are often riddled with inaccuracy, sometimes dogma, very often logical fallacy, it's so important that we are familiar with the ideas that went before us. Not only that we don't make the same mistakes again and make the same bad arguments or make the same appeals to, fideism, or, we don't beg the question, all this kind of thing. But actually, it's just so goddamn interesting. Yeah, even if Aristotle was a bigot, a man of his time, a sexist, a slave-keeping arsehole, I find it so thrilling to read work that is so seminal, so important, and just, oh my goodness, it's like, it's got a kind of aesthetic value, I would say. I mean, certainly some philosophers really did write absolutely beautifully. To name a few, we have Hume, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Kant. I mean, they are just a few. And I think, because I came from an English literature background, that's what I was studying before coming to philosophy, I feel as though philosophy gives you the best of both worlds if you look hard enough. You know, you can have your literary type of philosophy. So you can have your French existentialism, you can have your continental philosophy, which includes Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Hegel, and the French existentialists like Sartre, Camus, de Beauvoir. And you can also have your pure distilled rigour in terms of the sort of analytic philosophers. So your Russell, your Wittgenstein, your Frege, your Kripke. You can have the best of both worlds, really. But what the unifying strand is between these two schools of thought, between the continental and the analytic, is that we are trying to aim at truth. Now, I think it's important that I said trying to. In many ways, philosophy is just like literature, in that writers of philosophy, just as writers, authors and poets of the past have been interested in, are questions about the human condition and what it is to be human and the limitations of our humanity. I think you need to be realistic, though, about what philosophy can do for you, in terms of, if you think that philosophy is just some kind of takeaway book that's going to tell you the meaning of life and how to live and answer all the big questions for you, then you will come away from philosophy feeling shortchanged, because philosophy, although it might attempt to answer those questions, leaves you with possibly more questions than when you actually came into it. In terms of what my favourite philosophical questions are, I would say that I'm particularly interested in ethics, political philosophy, aesthetics, epistemology, and metaphysics. Okay, I know I can't be interested in all of those. That's not right. That's like everything. Okay, let's be specific now. What I'm really interested in, as in the subject of my PhD in future years, is ethics and meta-ethics. But don't hold me to that, because I've got a goddamn load of education still to come, and I don't want to say that I'm decided, because I'm just not. I mean, I've come into philosophy quite rightly with a really open mind. Last year, when I was doing my first year at a different university, I came in. Did I come in with preconceptions? I'm not really sure, to be honest. I obviously have my views. Everyone's got opinions, haven't they? But I would say that actually I knew that I had to come into philosophy with an open mind, and with a mind that was likely to be changed, with many impressions made upon it. And I think that's exactly the attitude you have to have when you come into philosophy. I mean, it's all very well having beliefs, and, you might have religious beliefs, you might have beliefs about knowledge, you might, come into philosophy as a skeptic, you might come out of philosophy as a skeptic. I mean, these are all fine, but what I would say is that please just, to actually get the most out of philosophy, try to be as open-minded as possible. And also, here's another important point, make sure you observe the principle of charity. I think Descartes is a particularly pertinent example of where possibly the principle of charity should be employed. So in some ways we have to think of these thinkers as products of their time. And, you know, for example, if they held particularly, I don't know, sexist views or just bigoted views, think about where they've come from, the historical context in which they're living through and writing through. Because more often than not, you know, thinkers like Aristotle, Schopenhauer, Heidegger, maybe not Heidegger, but, you know, take numerous examples of thinkers who, you know, were living through times different to those that we're living through. And you have to ask yourself, could they have known better? You know, could Schopenhauer have known better than to think that women were naturally subordinate to men? Now, I haven't thought too deeply about these issues. I will do in the future. But I think we still have to interpret charitably what these people were saying. Now, I'm not being an apologist for racism, sexism, or any kind of prejudice. I'm just saying that in the history of philosophy, there are many, many colourful ideas, and in some ways, although they may be ludicrous and they may bring a smile to our face, they make the discipline so much more colourful and so much richer. And actually, they give you quite a bit of mileage in your essays, so that's never a bad thing, especially if you're stuck for what to write about. So, finally, do I think you out there, should be studying philosophy? Well, I'll be honest with you, it's not an easy discipline. If you're going to be successful in philosophy, you need to be a very decent thinker, and you need to have a very precise and clear use of the English language, or whatever language you speak, and you need to understand that logic and reason are your best tools. You will have to forget some of the things you know about essay writing through, you know, English literature, all the rest of it. But I mean, it doesn't take long to pick up the basic idea of how to write a philosophy essay. But I would say that it wouldn't hurt you if you're not studying philosophy formally. It wouldn't hurt to just read some philosophy, in which case I'd recommend that you do read from the history of philosophy, because there are so many interesting ideas out there, ideas that will challenge you, which you should challenge, which will just inform your perspective on society, on your humanity, on the cosmos more generally. I think philosophy poses so many interesting questions, and I think the struggle and the strife that we all endure to try to latch upon some kind of answer to these questions is a very worthwhile struggle, and a ceaseless struggle, but one that necessarily makes philosophy worthwhile. So don't come to philosophy thinking that, oh, you're going to come out knowing the meaning of life, you're going to come out as some kind of noble sage. No, it won't make you the Oracle of Delphi, but what it will do is that it will make you a deeper thinker, and hopefully a more compassionate human being, actually. I mean, there are so many aspects of philosophy, as I said, and many people who go into philosophy go in because they have a specific interest. So, for example, one of my friends, Casey, who studies at the University of Pittsburgh, he is extremely interested in questions of artificial intelligence, for example. So he's interested in questions about kind of like the philosophy of mind, philosophy of language. So he knows what he wants to study. And to him, questions of ethics are whatever. But I'm of a completely different philosophical bent. I am deeply interested just troubled by questions of ethics and meta-ethics, and I care much less for questions in the philosophy of mind and the philosophy of language. So I think that's one of the most beautiful things about philosophy, is that in the same discipline you find people, you know, who are so diverse, just completely different. I mean, people come to philosophy from all angles. I mean, you've got people who did undergraduate degrees in science, in English literature, in, I don't know, computing, medicine, all kinds of things. It is just a discipline that seems to bring out the cross-examining side of people. I think it's a discipline that unites people who are brave enough to admit that they don't quite understand the implication or implications of their humanity and what it is to be in this world. Because I think it's a very confusing and strange idea that we are even here at all, and through philosophy we can possibly, only possibly, try to make sense of this and all of this, the external world. And that, I think, is the beauty of philosophy.